Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to do a blanket stitch, and this is what you're going to be using to sew together your pieces of felt. I never want to start on a corner, and if you're sewing something that's curved, what I recommend doing is starting in an area that you'll be able to leave probably about, a good 2 fingers or 3 finger space open. So if you have any straightaways, I'd start at the top of a straightaway, and then that way you can sew all the way around to the end of the straightaway, and then leave like a nice straight area open. The reason I do that is because as you're sewing it shut, it's a little bit difficult after you've stuffed whatever you're making, and if you have a nice straight area, it's a little bit easier than a curved area. Okay, to get started, I have my 2 pieces of fabric, so I'm just going to come up with my needle in between the 2 pieces of fabric like this. And that way my knot will be on the inside, and I can just kind of tuck those threads away and they won't be seen later on. Okay, so I'm going to come up, so I came up in between the layers. Now I'm going to go all the way around to the back side of the fabric, and I want to bring it up right where that last stitch was. So if I look at the back here, I'm going through both layers of fabric all the way through to where my first stitch came out of, okay, and I'm going to pull that. But as I'm pulling it, I don't want to pull it all the way because I want to leave that little loop. Okay, so now that I have a loop, I'm going to stick my needle through the loop and pull it tight. So that's how we start our first stitch, but now from now on, this is how we're going to stitch. So we're going to come up from the back side, and when we do that, we want our stitch to be about the same distance from the edge. So you can see I've kind of made it parallel to my first stitch, and then I'm going to pull my thread, and then as I pull it, before I pull it all the way, I'm going to put my needle through that loop like this, okay, and then I'm going to pull it like that, and that's where you get that little nice edge stitch there. Okay, so again, I'm going to come up from the back side, and I'll show you. You can see I'm at the back there. Let's get that thread out of the way for you. Okay, so I'm going to come up from the back side, and I want to go a little further, I think. Okay, so I come up from the back side of my thread, and I'm going to pull it, and remember I want to go through the loop, but I pulled too much, right? So I forgot to go through the loop. It's not a big deal. I'm just going to flip my fabric over. See this little stitch that's over there like that? Just going to put my needle through that stitch, pull it all the way through, and now I have that like that. So now I'm just going to continue to sew, and when I do continue to sew, I want to make sure that, again, my stitches are the same depth. So I'm trying to make sure that I put my needle into the fabric the same distance from the edge of the fabric to where I've brought my thread up, but then also the distance between the stitches, we want those to be pretty similar. Okay, so I'll show you that one last time. So I'm going to come up from the back side of my fabric through both layers of felt. I'm going to pull my thread until I have a little loop. I'm going to put my needle through that loop, and then I'm going to pull it tight. Okay, and you want to make sure that it's tight enough that you don't have loose loops there. So you can see this one's a little loose. So what I can do is I can use my needle and just pull that loop tight, which tightens that, and then I just need to pull this loop tight to tighten the next one. You don't want it so tight that it gathers your fabric, but you don't really want space in between there. Okay, so now we are going to imagine like I am almost out of thread. So when you have about this much thread, the rule is you want to be able to turn your needle like that. So when you have about this much thread, you're going to want to tie a knot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over to the wrong side. Okay, I'm going to grab a little loop like this. I'm going to pull my thread, and then I have a loop here, and I want to put my needle through that loop like that, and then pull it tight. And just like all the other times we've made knots, we want to do that 2 or 3 times. And our goal is that our knot will roll to the back of the stuffy or whatever you're making, and not roll to the front. Okay, so again, I'm just waiting for that loop. I'll put my needle through the loop and pull it tight. Okay, now I'm just going to trim that off there. And then you would want to trim it so that it's nice and close. Then it looks almost like it's part of the stitching. Okay, so now what if you're halfway around whatever you're sewing and you need to start, like say you routed a thread and you still need to go all the way around. So I'll show you how to start a new stitch. I'll show you how you would restart if you have done your blanket stitching and you need to restart a piece of thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up right where that last stitch was, like this. Okay, I'm going to tuck my threads in between the fabrics so you don't see them, like that. And then I'm just going to put my needle through this loop at the bottom here. Okay, so that just secures our thread. Now I'm going to come up through the back, just like we've been doing, and just do my regular stitch. So I brought my needle up through the back, then I'm going to put my needle through that loop that we create, and then pull it tight. And then we just keep on stitching, and that's it. It looks really complicated, but it's very a nice simple stitch. So when I mark this stitch, what I'm looking for is that your stitches are nice and smooth, that the knots on the back are barely visible, like you can see it, but it kind of blends in. There's no loose threads. Your stitches are almost all the same depth, so your stitches are the same depth, and the width between your stitches, so in between here and here, is about the same.